Environmental defenders face many risks while protecting Jamaica's natural resources. They often lack adequate access to information, justice, and meaningful participation in decision making. That's where the Escazú Agreement comes in. It's a regional landmark treaty that ensures adequate access to environmental information, justice, participation in decision making, and stronger protections for environmental defenders. Hello, my global family. I'm Dana Lynn, and welcome to this special podcast series on defending our rights, environmental justice in Jamaica. It's brought to you by the Jamaica Environment Trust in collaboration with Global Yadi, with support from the UNDP implemented Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. This series will explore the Escazú Agreement and what it means for Jamaica in securing environmental rights and stronger protections for environmental defenders. Whenever there's a major environmental issue, we often hear the question, where are the young people and why are they not being vocal on these matters? The truth is, young people are speaking up. They're leading change, they're organizing, but sometimes there are barriers that limit their involvement. Joining us on this episode is Eleanor Terrelonge. She is a climate change practitioner and founder of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. So we'll be exploring the role of youth in environmental advocacy, the challenges they face, and how stronger policy support can empower the next generation of change makers. Eleanor, welcome to the Global Yadi podcast.
Hi, Dana Lynn. Thank you for having me.
And thanks for being here. So before I get into the meat of the matter, talk to me about your advocacy journey. Like what inspired, how did you begin in this area and what was that like?
So I got into climate change advocacy by accident. I am a molecular biologist by training. So I guess I come from a scientific background. Mm-hmm. And initially my interest in climate change was more about the biodiversity, protecting the flora, the fauna, the birds, the trees. And I just reached out to see how I could volunteer. We started the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. But what I quickly discovered, because, climate change is a lot to learn, I found out how much climate change is a human issue. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about the birds and the bees and the trees, but it's really about lives and livelihoods. And I think for me, making those connections really started what I think is my passion in climate change. So that's how I kind of moved from interest to passion when I started to see the human connection. And Jamaica, we're a small island developing state. We're in the throes of climate change. We don't have the luxury to wait around. So I thought that it was really important that as young people, we had our voice being heard as the next generation coming up. And I guess that's how it started. And, I've been in this space since 2017. Definitely learned a lot. I think I'm kind of transitioning from the youth activist to more, I'm aging, I'm moving out of the youth bracket a little bit. But definitely happy that I'm in the space and hope to make some impact here.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I'm listening to you, and I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't know you because we've worked together for quite some time on a lot of initiatives, and even when you were at the helm of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, which you're no longer, and I know, of course, for a fact that that's something that you have been working on, the contingency planning, getting more young people in this space, and so you've seen a lot of things, you've experienced a lot of things, and so what are some of the challenges that you'd say young people face being in environmental advocacy or advocating for them?
I think there's a misperception that young people are not interested or don't have the attention span. Because what tends to happen, especially in youth volunteer spaces, is that you do have a high rate of youth turnover. But I want to, and I'm happy that we have this platform to say it, because it's not that there is a lack of interest, but young people tend to be time poor, We're trying to build a life. We're trying to keep up, whether it's with school, with our job, starting our career, figuring ourselves out. And sometimes that means that we don't have the time or necessarily the capacity to be involved in advocacy in the way that we really want to be. It's not from a lack of interest or that we don't care about the issue. But, young people are also dealing with real life, and sometimes it's hard to strike that balance because you do want to prioritize your own growth and development. The more you grow and develop as a person, also the better you can be in advocacy. So it's kind of important to strike that balance. I think another problem that young people have, and it's something that I've noticed in the space, it's getting better, but I don't think we're quite there yet, is access. access to information, access to change makers, access to policy makers. There isn't really necessarily that very open line of communication.
Yes.
Sometimes even on my advocacy journey, we were complaining about, the government is not doing this specific thing, or we're not seeing this happen, when some of these things were happening behind the scenes, but we're just not aware of it. So I do think there is definitely need for improved communication. I think something that I also experienced is that sometimes people engage young people to tick a box. It's very tokenistic. It's just to say, we had a young person on our panel, or we had a young person at our event. But the recommendations from the young people were not always taken on. There wasn't really, in my opinion, intentional engagement of young people, meeting them where they are, and also leveraging their skill sets. I think that was a gap that I noticed as well, because we're engaging the young people, and then after the workshop is finished or whatever, that's where the engagement ends. But young people have a lot of skills that, our more experienced generation have different sets of skills. So in terms of, for example, our social media literacy, or being able to engage people in different and new ways as the world evolves, I don't really think that necessarily young people have been encouraged to capitalize on using those skills in the environment or in the climate change space. As I said, it's been a while in the space, and there's definitely a shift. I think there's a global shift as well. We're looking at youth advocates across the world. I know Greta, really amplified youth voice in climate change, and I think that has had its ripple effects in different regions. But there's definitely more work to be done, and I want people to not write off young people as quickly and as easily, but perhaps talk to them a little bit more and figure out what is stopping them, or what kind of tools do they need to be able to make more of a change.
All right. Thank you so much for painting that very big picture, and we needed to see that. And I particularly liked when you mentioned about young people being invited and giving recommendations, but the recommendations didn't move forward. And linking that back to Escazú Agreement, that part where they speak about meaningful participation. So it's not supposed to be like a checkbox item. In my introduction, and overall, linking back to the reality, people often say, where are the young people? Why are they not speaking? That perception exists. The young people are being silent. How do you respond to that?
So I'm not going to be a hypocrite, because I do understand where some of it comes from. And I do agree, if we say that we're talking as young people, but other people are not hearing the message, then we need to improve our messaging.
Right.
We need to be more visible in the space, maybe more militant. I know that's a word that Diana has used. Young people need to be a little bit more militant in the space. So I do take it. And I kind of, that has been my approach. You take the feedback and you look at it and say, okay, what is applicable and what can we use to build on? But I also think on the flip side, it kind of is discouraging, especially when you are doing work in the space, to feel as if people aren't seeing it. Your work isn't really being respected. So again, I think bridging some of those, I think we need more communication. I think we need to talk to each other more, and not just within the climate change space. I think sometimes we are in this bubble and everybody knows each other and it's the same familiar faces, but we need to be talking to persons outside of our bubble a little bit more, so that, maybe the visibility of our work needs to be done. I think also something that can help, I think more, and it's coming out more, but I think more training around climate change and environmental matters will definitely help. I think one of the things for me I've been very passionate about, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I would love to see our school curriculum infiltrated with climate change information. I tell this story a lot because I've seen it in Cuba, where they integrate climate change in their curriculum. So for example, in English, the essays are about the impacts of storms. In math and physics, they're calculating angles related to sea level rise. So what they've done is to integrate climate into all aspects. So it's not just the geo students or the environment students. And I think when you do that, that is where you really start to see that youth consciousness start to, proliferate more. I think once people also kind of see the different realms of climate change and environmentalism, maybe they weren't like me interested in the bees and the birds and the trees, but maybe they're, from a social background, they might be interested. And I think when you start to expose more young people to, the different sides of it and how advocacy can take different forms, then I do expect that you'll find a stronger movement of young people.
I love that, and I love that vivid example. And let me tell you how I can relate to that. in math class in high school. That is how I know how to read utility bills now, because we literally had exercises that you had to calculate the previous readings, current readings for the bill. So linking that to the Anglo sea level rise and all of those things, there are ways.
Yes.
And so I love it, drilling down into that specific example of how we incorporate and, encourage more youth. But another spin on that question, when we speak about the perception of, our youth speaking out, sometimes we have major issues happening, and so you will have a JET, the Jamaica Environment Trust, other NGOs, civil society groups, making statements. It's been publicized in the media. So sometimes people are asking, where are the young people then? So, even now at this time of this recording, we have a situation where there's a protected area that has been cleared in Jamaica along the Port Royal Palisades Strip, to make way for a car park. I mean, it's fairly new now, but I'm just linking it to scenarios like this is where people are looking to see, are the young people speaking out? Why do you think we're not speaking out? Or the young people, because we're not young.
Younger.
Yeah. Do you think it's a case they're not speaking out? Like, can you give some context to scenarios like this?
I think young people are definitely speaking out, and maybe a lot of these advocacy, what tends to happen is that the advocacy groups come together for a specific topic. So it might be that, young people are involved in the response, but maybe people aren't necessarily viewing it as coming from a youth place. So for example, I think I can talk about the Puerto Buena campaign that we did a couple of years ago. That is where they had cleared some mangroves in the Puerto Buena area. And there was a large advocacy campaign around it. It was a collaboration between a number of groups, including JET, the JCCYC, I think Young People for Action on Climate Change.
Yes.
And it was really youth driven. We had a very good, in my opinion, I think very strong social media presence and campaign around it. And it wasn't just speaking out against the issue and saying, oh, this is wrong, but also providing the context and the education to go along with that. I know there were also quite a number of media engagements outside of just the social media. We did radio, we did TV. And, in addition to that, there's also the deep sea mining campaign. That's another campaign that's going on. Again, it's a coalition of groups, but there's also a strong youth presence in that. So I think maybe it is that, maybe people see environment and they're not necessarily looking at it as the young people speaking up.
Right.
But young people are definitely speaking up. They've been involved in the issues. I know even as the JCCYC, we try to be involved whenever there's a national consultation. We try to attend at least to make sure that our voices are heard. I once heard that, if you're not at the table, you are the meal. So you have to make sure that you are sitting around the table to make sure that, your voice is being heard. So I don't think it is that young people are not speaking out. Maybe it is a visibility issue. And again, all in the spirit of taking the feedback and seeing how we can improve. There's definitely room for improvement, but it's definitely not that, young people are silent or anything like that.
Yeah. I like that response in the sense of so many things to consider, because sometimes not everything is a youth issue per se to say you need to separate the youth perspective because support is being given.
Yes.
And I think back to what you mentioned about the deep sea mining campaign, the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, the JCCYC, have been strong proponents and defenders or advocates for deep sea mining, participating in public consultations against deep sea mining. But there was an issue where I remember there was one of the conferences at the headquarters, the International Seabed Authority, when they had some closed meeting and there were protests outside.
Yes.
And I know there was a case of some of the youth advocates being intimidated, police came to escort them away and they were having a peaceful protest. There was not like a mass crowd or anything violence. And so there is, and what I'm getting to is, sometimes those things happen.
Yes.
And sometimes it can be backlash in other settings. Some people are, can you speak to some of those barriers or factors that may inhibit young people from wanting to be vocal as they'd want to be?
It can be an intimidating space. And I kind of have to take myself out of it because my back very broad. I'm not afraid of nobody. But I know that is not the reality for everyone. And I'm also privileged to have, I've never been in a job where I can't speak out about certain things. And that's not true for all young people. And if you take it back to what I said at the beginning, at the end of the day, for a lot of young people, the priority right now is to build your career. and to, set yourself up for whatever your future goals is. And there is the fear of, if I speak out, especially if I'm in a certain job or if I work in a certain industry, if I speak out on this, then, is my job security going to be threatened? Am I not going to get a promotion? Is my boss going to be upset with me? You mentioned intimidation by police. I was there that day. And again, I'm not really afraid of nobody, so it didn't affect me. But I can see how, especially for the very young persons, because we had a lot of people from schools, university attending, how that can be an intimidating experience because, as you said, it was a very peaceful protest. We weren't blocking the road, we weren't making any noise. And the police came and moved us to a different location. If you don't have that support around you, if you're not a part of a group, if you're not seeing people, saying, don't worry about it, you'll be protected, then I can understand why that might discourage young people from speaking out. But I do want to add to that because we talk about different forms of advocacy. And I do want to kind of say to young people that protesting and speaking out is not the only role that you can play. There's a lot of support that is needed in the background. Research to go into what is being said in the public, putting the campaign together. Even if you're going to write the speech, maybe you're not comfortable being the one in the limelight or in front of the camera or, on the mic at the protest. But that doesn't mean that your voice cannot be heard and that you cannot participate. And I think that, through my experience at the JCCYC, I think a lot of what I would consider our most valuable members have been in the background. They never were the ones on the panel or at the events. I'm not saying that those people aren't important, but without that strong support behind the scenes, whether it's admin, whether it is, as I said, putting the campaign together, doing the research, without that, then the limelight part of the action cannot take place. So I think maybe for young people who might be a bit intimidated by, being in the public, maybe explore other ways to be involved in advocacy, speak to some of the groups, see what the needs are, because maybe your skill set might fit perfectly into one of those needs. Even things like graphic design, because when we did the protest, somebody had to design the signs and the posters and all of that, and that is a skill set that you might have that graphic design skill. Maybe you couldn't come to the protest. Maybe you couldn't get time off work to come to the protest, because that's another thing. But you could still participate using the skills that you already have.
Right. I love that. So, and I think young people needed to hear that, because a lot of times people think, what can I do? And you don't all. And so a lot of times too, advocacy and speaking out, you get the role that you play as an advocate. Sometimes it's synonymous with a spokesperson, and not everybody has to play that role. So I'm very happy that you underscored, that, so it encourages, more people out there that there is a space for them in speaking out. But, like you said, there's so much more to explore as it relates to how people, the fear of backlash, because that's very real.
Yes.
That's very real. I have personal experiences, though the podcast isn't about me. Where, I actually had to leave a role because of me being vocal, and we have situations where even Caribbean counterparts applying for jobs, their resumes get placed in the trash, and we're straight up asked, why are you applying for this role? You're out here. And so there is this stigmatization that young people speaking out for the environment are problematic.
Yes.
And so that's also another way of oppressing.
Yes.
And so in one breath, we're asking where the young people are, but then they're being ostracized and, vilified for taking a stand for something good.
Yes. And a lot of time, young people get accused of doing it for political gain, which in my experience has not been the case. And I don't just mean me as a young person, but also the people that I see acting in the space. Right. It is really from a genuine concern, a genuine love for the country, a genuine want, to leave a better future for our children and our grandchildren. But sometimes, and I get it, if you're speaking out against a particular administration or against a particular policy, it's easy for somebody to say, oh, well, you're just for the other party, or, you're doing this for your own personal gain. And I think, again, that is another layer of the stigma, because Jamaica is very small. Everybody talk to everybody. So they might say, so Dana Lynn did do this, and then that person talks to that person, and it becomes this whole, Dana Lynn can't get any work anywhere else. So I think there are a lot of nuances, and of course, in our Jamaican context, environmentalism isn't, we have other problems, right? We have crime, people, we have corruption. So people think that environmentalism should be way down on the bottom, and we have, why aren't young people talking about murder? Why aren't young people talking about this? But it's not that one issue is more important than the other. And the more that I stay in the space, the more I realize that climate change is not an environment issue. It is a whole of society issue. So all those things, crime, poverty, are affected by climate change. And I don't think that young people should be discouraged about taking the path that aligns with them personally.
Well said. And so another part that I want to explore with you, given that the Escazú Agreement is ensuring access to adequate information, and we spoke about that, access to justice, access to participation in decision making, that hinges a lot on policy and national institutions as well to be the catalyst for that kind of change. What role or how do you think our national institutions or policymakers can better support young people in advocacy?
I think some of it has to be a top-down approach in terms of creating what we're calling an enabling environment for
Love
young
that phrase.
people. Love it. Yeah, I picked it up, but I'm applying it to everything. I create an enabling environment for young people to participate in. So you're right. You want to feel that your policymakers or your leaders are engaging young people in a meaningful way. So as you said, not just the tokenistic sort of engagement. And the Escazú Agreement provides a really good framework for that. I think it touches on the different pillars. And what we need to see now is how we're going to implement those different pillars of the Escazú Agreement across multiple sectors. How is it going to be rolled out into policy? And not just policy, but also our strategic objectives, the targets that we've set for our country, our climate commitments, all of those things. I think we'd have to really integrate it and not have it as a standalone, but really kind of bring everything together so we have a more holistic approach. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that, our situation might be a little bit different than some of the other countries involved in the Escazú Agreements.
Yes.
For example, in Latin America, there's a whole different level of danger associated with environmental defenders, literally fear for your lives, which we're fortunate in Jamaica that it's not on that level. But as we've discussed before, there is still that sort of stigma associated with it. There is that sort of feeling that young people are not being meaningfully engaged, that they don't have access to the information, to be able to inform their decision making. And also just the fear of backlash. I mean, I know we talk about protecting environmental defenders and we think protection means physical protection, but some of that is also your kind of social protection, making sure that your job security isn't threatened, that your livelihood isn't threatened, that your schooling isn't threatened. And I think that, I'm hopeful that the appetite is there on a national level. I don't see why it wouldn't be. And we just kind of need to see more of how that is implemented and how it trickles down to us as young people.
I like that. So I know you kind of alluded to this in some of your previous responses, but in winding down, what is your hope for the future of youth in advocacy in Jamaica?
My hope is that the next generation of young people will be better than we are. That is always the hope. You want every generation or every iteration to be more successful than the last. And again, I think with the global push towards more, I think compared to 2017 when I started and where we are now, I think we're far more aware of climate change. I definitely think we've moved past the raising awareness part and we're now at the taking action part. And I think that, Gen Z, give it up to them. They're very resourceful. There can be things that I don't see them do, the way that they engage even on social media or even in real life. Clearly, I'm feeling my age because, I can't relate to some of these things, but they're going to be the ones that carry it forward. I also think Gen Z as a whole, not just with climate change, but they're also very politically aware, a lot more than I think I was at that age. So I think it all goes well. I think we're also at a point where not only are we talking more about climate change, but we also recognize that this is a right now issue and not a future issue, not a yesterday issue. And I think that sense of urgency is really being felt among young people. So I'm hopeful that they will take up the mantle and continue the work. But of course, that has to be supported by this enabling environment to keep them in the space, to keep them motivated. Climate change can be a depressing space, especially when you stay in it too long and you get in the trenches and you feel like the world is ending. But I think young people are also very good at kind of bringing back that hope, that sort of, I want a brighter future and I'm going to continue working toward that brighter future. So I'm hopeful, definitely not doom and gloom about our next generation.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Well, On that note, I think we can close out. But thank you again for taking the time to come on the podcast, be a part of this series, and really paint that very detailed picture of what it is like being a young person in advocacy, what needs to happen to better support young people and to protect them as well, to become the change that everybody is waiting for them to be. And so youth are here, they're taking action, they're making real impact, and they need greater support. And so with the Escazú Agreement, promoting access to information, access to justice, and access to meaningful participation in decision making, young people can be empowered to be the next generation of change makers. And so continue tuning in to the Escazú series. Follow the Jamaica Environment Trust and Global Yadi for more information. And always do remember to like, follow, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Give your feedback on the episode. Thank you so much.